Today I want to share a chilling story of Sarah Thompson, a woman who recently reached out to me with her haunting childhood experiences. What she told me isn't just another childhood ghost story. It's a series of events that forever changed her life and her understanding of what lurks in the shadows of old houses. Her story began in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Massachusetts. Growing up, I lived in this picture-perfect neighborhood in suburban Massachusetts. You know the type. Tree-lined streets, white picket fences, and those classic New England colonial houses that looked like they belonged on a postcard. Our house was at the end of Maple Street, backing up against dense woods with an old creek running through it. It was one of those places where everyone knew everyone, and parents let their kids play outside until the streetlights came on. But there was something off about our neighborhood. Something that the adults never talked about, but all the kids somehow knew. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed to whisper on windless nights, or how pets would suddenly freeze and stare at empty corners. Little things that didn't quite add up. The first strange incident I remember happened when I was 6. I had this habit of talking to myself in mirrors, making funny faces, pretending to be different characters. Normal kid stuff. But one evening while I was brushing my teeth, my reflection didn't follow my movements. For just a split second, it stayed still while I moved. I remember dropping my toothbrush and running out of the bathroom so fast I slipped on the tiles. My parents dismissed it as an overactive imagination, but I never looked into that bathroom mirror again after sunset. But the real story, the one that still haunts me, happened when I was 8. It was during one of our regular family gatherings at my grandparents' Victorian mansion in Rhode Island. The house itself was a character in this story. Built in 1887 with 4 floors of endless corridors, creaking floorboards, and more hidden spaces than anyone could count. My grandparents had converted the massive attic into this amazing playroom for all the cousins. Picture this: worn hardwood floors covered with vintage rugs, ceiling beams you could almost touch, and dormer windows that looked out over the rolling hills. During the day, it was magical. But as the sun set, the shadows in the corners seemed to grow deeper, and the creaks and groans of the old house became more deliberate. That particular weekend, there were 7 of us kids up there. Me, my sister Sarah, our cousins Michael and Emma, and 3 kids from the neighbor's family. We were playing this elaborate game of hide and seek, using old sheets to build forts between the antique furniture. That's when Michael found it, a door we'd never noticed before hidden behind a massive Victorian bookcase. Now you have to understand, we thought we knew every inch of that attic. We'd spent countless hours exploring every nook and cranny. But this door? It was like it had appeared out of nowhere. The door itself was wrong. While everything else in the attic was well maintained, this door looked ancient. The wood was darker, almost black, with these strange carvings around the frame that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. The brass doorknob was green with age, covered in cobwebs that looked like they hadn't been disturbed in decades. We all gathered around it, drawn by that magnetic pull that only forbidden things have. The air felt different near the door, heavier, colder. Emma swore she could hear faint humming coming from behind it, like an old lullaby being sung from far away. After what felt like hours of debate, we decided to open it. I was the oldest, so I stepped forward to turn the knob. It was ice cold to the touch and seemed to vibrate slightly under my fingers. As the door creaked open, we were hit with a wave of stale air that smelled like old books and something else, something sweet and metallic. The room beyond was massive, much bigger than it should have been given the house's architecture. Our flashlight beams revealed what looked like a child's bedroom frozen in time. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, except there were small footprints in the dust, fresh ones leading deeper into the room. The room was filled with toys from different eras: a rocking horse from the Victorian period, a 1950s pedal car, modern-looking dolls still in their packages. But something was off about all of them. The rocking horse's eyes were too realistic, seeming to follow our movements. The pedal car had what looked like scratch marks all over it. And the dolls, their heads were all turned at impossible angles, their painted smiles somehow too wide. In the center of the room stood a massive dollhouse, an exact replica of my grandparents' house down to the tiny furniture in each room. As we approached it, we could see tiny figures moving inside, acting out scenes we couldn't quite make out. That's when we heard the first whisper, "Stay and play with us." It wasn't one voice, but many, layered over each other like a chorus of children speaking in unison. The temperature dropped dramatically, and our flashlight beams began to flicker. The doorway behind us, our only exit, seemed to be getting smaller. Then we saw them, shadowy figures emerging from the corners of the room. They looked like children, but their movements were wrong, too fluid, like they were underwater. They started moving toward us, their features becoming clearer with each step. That's when we realized they all looked like us, twisted, darker versions of ourselves with empty black eyes and two wide smiles. We ran, all of us at once, pushing and scrambling to get through the doorway. I remember the sound of laughter behind us, high-pitched and inhuman. As we slammed the door shut, I swear I felt small, cold hands trying to grab my ankles. We made it downstairs and found the adults still chatting in the living room, completely unaware of what had happened. When we tried to tell them about the room, they looked at us strangely. My grandfather, usually the storyteller of the family, got very quiet. He asked us to describe exactly where the door was. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I overheard him talking to my grandmother. He was saying something about how they're back, and it's happening again. I learned years later that in the 1950s, 3 children had disappeared from the neighborhood. They were last seen playing in my grandparents' house. The next morning, my grandfather went up to the attic with some of the other adults. They spent hours looking, but the door was gone. The bookcase stood flush against a solid wall, with no sign there had ever been a door there. But they did find something else, a small handprint in the dust on top of the bookcase, too small to belong to any of us kids. The strange things didn't stop there. For weeks afterward, we all experienced episodes. Sarah would wake up screaming about children calling her name from inside her closet. Michael started sleepwalking, always trying to get back to the attic. Emma developed an intense fear of mirrors, saying she could see the shadow children standing behind her reflection. For me, the most terrifying part came about a month later. I was going through old family photos when I found one from the 1950s, showing my grandparents' house. In one of the attic windows, you could clearly see several children looking out. They were all wearing clothes from different time periods, and they were all staring directly at the camera with those same empty black eyes we'd seen in the hidden room. The photo sent chills down my spine. But what really terrified me was what I noticed in the corner of the image. A small figure that looked exactly like me, wearing the same clothes I had worn the day we found the door. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that attic. My grandparents' house has since been sold, but I still drive by it sometimes. I always check the attic windows, and sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I can see small faces pressed against the glass, watching and waiting. You know what's really strange? While researching this story, I found reports of similar incidents in other old Victorian houses along the East Coast, always involving hidden rooms, always involving children, and always leaving behind more questions than answers. This experience changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. It taught me that there are things in this world that we can't explain, things that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. It taught me that sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones we read in books or watch in movies. They're the ones that happen to us when we least expect it. If you've experienced something similar, or have your own childhood horror story to share, please leave it in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our fears helps us understand them better. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more true horror stories from my past. Remember, not all childhood memories are meant to be pleasant, and sometimes the doors we find are better left unopened.